We're excited to have our last partner. Last but not least. And when I originally emailed everyone, Peter was the only one to offer me several dates. And for that, I was very grateful because everybody else was like, the 17th is the only one that works for me. But Peter's like, I could do it this one or this one. I was like,
I got no life.
You're awesome. But we have been blessed by the ministry of Day One and would love to hear not only about what you all do, but how you ended up in our space. So welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you, John. Well, good evening, everybody. So glad to see everybody here tonight. I always love to eat Chef Glenn's food, so any excuse to do that is a blessing. We love being at Second-Ponce. I think we were the first group you leased space to like that. So we were kind of the guinea pigs. So I guess it worked. Who's familiar with Day One? All right, excellent. Well, then you probably know that it's a weekly radio program. We're on 205 stations now. Ethel Ware just got us on 4 new stations in Lafayette and several other wonderful places. In Atlanta, we're on WSB, Sundays at 7:05. I have to say, we goofed up this past Sunday. It was Pentecost Sunday, and our Trinity Sunday, which is this coming Sunday, program ran. So we're running. So next Sunday is Pentecost, Doc. I don't know if you need to change that in your. But anyway, things happen. That's never happened before that I can remember. We do have a website at day1.org, and Ron has conveniently pulled that up. There's lots of stuff on our website, and we welcome you to come. This is the actual true sermon coming up. Rebecca Lamont is at Trinity Presbyterian Church, not too far from here, and she is preaching on Trinity Sunday. And then following her is Joy J. Moore. She's a professor of preaching at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota, but she's a Methodist, so that's interesting. We've got articles, science and faith, and keep going. Yep. And then we just posted a video we had a Day One event in March with the Episcopal presiding bishop, Michael Curry, who is an incredible preacher. So the video of that evening is on our website too. So come visit. There's plenty there for you to see. So next slide, please. So you can listen. Does anybody listen to podcasts? So look for Day One weekly program, and you can listen anytime. You don't have to get up early on Sunday morning and listen to the radio. It's on all the podcast apps. So feel free to tune in that way. Bill, you can listen as you're running in the morning. So, all right. So welcome to Day One. This is our digs. We are in what I affectionately call the catacombs of the sanctuary building on S1, and this is our entrance, and this is our studio. Now, a lot of you know Dr. Bill Self. We're going to hear from him in a minute, the late senior pastor of Wayuka Road and Johns Creek Baptist. When we were looking for space, Bill knew about this space down on the first floor, and so Tom Jack was the building administrator then and helped us. So what we did, there was a wide open space. It was an assembly area down there, and we just plopped a studio in the middle of the space. And y'all are welcome to come see it, but that'll give you an idea. This is Donald Jones, who he's the production guy, and he does the masterful job of recording the programs and putting them together for the radio and for the podcast. A little different. The radio program, of course, has to be edited for time. And for instance, on WSB, we're on for 25 minutes. Most other stations carry us for 30 minutes. You're missing, if you listen to WSB, you miss the follow-up interview where I talk to the preacher about the sermon. And a lot of people really like that. But you can listen to the podcast or go to our website and listen to that. But Donald has been doing this for longer than I have. I've been there 22 years. He's been doing this for over 30 years. He started editing when they used tape, and he had to cut the tape to edit the pieces together. So he's very grateful for computers. You can go back. This is the empty recording booth, or the vocal booth. It's right here, but then that's inside. We record the preachers in there, and then we set up to record the interviews in there. All right? Here we are, hard at work. We're recording Chelsea Waits, who's at Ebenezer Baptist. Used to be here. That's right. So that's her. This is Winston Arthur. He's an Episcopal priest in Stone Mountain, and Donald and me, just to give you a little inside feel for what it's like. Now, this is our staff currently. Ethelware Carter is here. She is our administrative assistant. She does all the work. We take the glory. This is a Christmas dinner, I think, Christmas party. Donald and me. I don't know what's he doing there? I don't know. All right. This is a map showing our stations. It's a little hard to see the little red dots on this, but 200 stations, and we're in about a dozen other countries as well.
Is it every state?
No, only the Christian states. We're working on that. We need to. The thing about radio is, people say, oh, why are you on the radio anymore? Well, the radio is still listened to the studies show people are still listening to radio in their cars or at home or whatever. And people say, oh, Christian preachers and all do podcasts now. You don't need to be on the radio. But the radio, as far as I'm concerned, is evangelism, because we get accidental listeners who tune in because they have WSB on their car radio, and they say, oh, what? So that's one of my favorite things about being on the radio. What's new at Day One? This is just some things that are happening with us. We were awarded this year a $1 million 4-year grant from the Lilly Endowment. They have this thing called the Compelling Preaching Initiative. And so we are working on creating new resources for preachers and scholars and congregations. We're already hard at work at that. We have a wonderful project director for that, Katie Kime. She is a Presbyterian minister, but has also worked on other Lilly grants before. So we're very excited about that. Lilly has offered the grantees to apply for another $250,000 to flesh out their grant project. So we're working on putting that proposal together. John mentioned my upcoming retirement, and that's going to be interesting. I think it looks like I'm going to be working a little bit behind the scenes for a while new people and things come in. So, but we'll keep you all posted on how that looks. Yeah, I love Day One. I love what we do, and I believe very strongly in it. So I'm going to be involved in some way or another, at least with my prayers. So, and giving. We do take donations. So, this summer marks 10 years, right? Here. We moved in this summer, I think it was August, or July or August, and Doc, one of the things, when we were doing these negotiations with Tom Jack, Doc was the interim preacher, the interim pastor, and we were kind of concerned, what if he stays on? What if he leaves? What if they get somebody else that doesn't like Day1, you know? So God intervened, and we're grateful for that because it's just been a wonderful, wonderful time here. This is a beautiful campus. We love the activity during the week now. You know, we share the catacombs now with Respite Care Atlanta, who you already heard from, who we just think they're amazing. So, yeah, so that's the latest news. What I want to do in our little time left, yes, sir.
I literally moved into our offices the same week.
Okay.
We were unloading boxes, you were moving into your office, and I was moving into mine as senior pastor the same week. Yeah.
That is a historic week. Speaking of historic, I like that segue. We're going to look a little bit at the history of this program. It became Day1 in 2002, which is 21 years ago now, right? So people still call it the Protestant Hour, which is what it started as in 1945. So I'm going to play a few snippets from some of the great preachers who were on the Protestant Hour and Day1. A little bit of history. The first Protestant Hour program aired on Easter Sunday in 1945. It was a live radio broadcast on WSB, and I think there was a little network of stations. The four denominations that produced this and actually paid the bills were Presbyterian, Methodist, Lutheran, and Episcopal. Now, I put an asterisk on Episcopal because it's not true. Actually, the first four denominations that put this program together were the Presbyterians, Methodists, Lutherans, and Southern Baptists. A lot of people don't know that. They lasted a year, and then they decided to do their own thing in Fort Worth. So that's when the Episcopal Church came in. The organization was also founded by not only the denominational judicatories, as they're called, but by the schools that the denominations were associated with. So Emory University, Candler School of Theology, Columbia Theological Seminary in Decatur, and Agnes Scott College, whose alumna is Ethelware Carter, came together to create this program to broadcast the gospel on this new medium of radio and reach the audiences. So they actually built this huge structure. Maybe some of you remember on Clifton Road, it was across from what became the CDC, called the Protestant Radio and Television Center. Huge facility. It had one of the largest sound stages in the Southeast for film and video production. It had a chapel with a real pipe organ in it where they recorded choirs and little services and things. And then they had a studio to record the Protestant Hour. But the Methodists and the Presbyterian, they all had other programs that they produced at this center. When I came on in 2001, the board had sold that building back to Emory. Emory built later, they built this, I think it's apartments and restaurants and things there on Clifton Road. But I was there for a month before we moved to the space we'd leased at All Saints Episcopal Church in Midtown, where we were for 12 years before we came here. I'll never forget that month because, the building was really not in good shape, and the technology hadn't been kept up. The board had decided what had happened was the Protestant Hour organization became kind of a landlord for different groups leasing space in that big building, kind of like Doc. And, they wanted to focus on the program, so they decided to sell that albatross of a building and focus on the program. That first month that I was there, my office was extremely hot, and the thermostat didn't seem to do anything. And so Emory owned the building, so they had their building people come look, and they said, that boiler is about to blow up. So we'll just turn it off. So that would have been interesting. So the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship joined in 2004. What happened was in the early to mid 2000s, the four denominations they paid for the production. They had a producer on their staff who would come. They would select their own preachers and come to Atlanta. Well, one by one, those denominations had to cut their budgets. So, of course, we went to the Baptists for money. But what we decided to do is, well, let's be kind of the broad mainline voice. And, of course, we had to support that. So we created development apparatus. We merged with the Episcopal Media Center, which was the Episcopal component. So we've been limping along ever since. But we did start at that time, we started the Day1 Advisory Board, or now Advisory Council. Doc's on that. We have about 68 well-known preachers and scholars, professors, church leaders who are on that, who recommend preachers and help us with their advice and counsel. Now, I want to play some of these. These are some snippets from the Protestant Hour, just to give you a kind of a flavor of some of these preachers. This is 1946, one of the very first programs in our archives, Bishop J.C. Harrell. That's pretty. Can you play
Paul,
that?
in the presence of Christ, was moved to ask a revealing question. The struggle and the yielding of that great soul are written into it. As I look at the printed page, it seems to stand out in bold relief. When I think on the story, it seems to shout itself at me, Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? The question arrests us. We linger over it to discover its meaning and implications.
Very different style than you hear from Doc or John, right? It's a very kind of pronouncing the good news, very articulate. The next one is Dr. William Wallace, who's no relationship to me that I know of, but he was a United Methodist minister, and this is from 1947. And some of the language is a little contemporary for that time, but I want you to hear this because this was pretty bold for a Southern preacher on a mostly Southeastern radio program at the time, 1947.
Today is Race Relations Day in our Methodism. Isn't it about time that we strip off some of the prejudices from our minds on this question and begin to work it out realistically? I am as white as any and was born farther south than the deep south. And I want to say that the Southern Christian white man needs to take the lead in this great problem before our nation at this time. All the Negro wants or needs is a fair deal, just and square in every way. Can't we grant that to him? Verily, I believe we can and we must do this. Then there's the matter of religious prejudice. It seems to me that it is later than we think on this question. And while Christian groups harangue one another, other philosophies of life are not asleep. Would it not be well to give ourselves wholeheartedly to the task of Christian cooperation and live in Christian unity? I speak not only to my own church on this matter, but to all groups of religious people as well. For certainly the day is here when close cooperation between different religious groups is vitally necessary. Certainly those of us who follow the teachings of Christ should find points of interest and similarity of worship that would draw our hearts and our minds closer together.
So that was pretty controversial back in 1947. I wonder what kind of mail they got because we hear from listeners occasionally, especially when Doc preaches. The next one is interesting. Dr. Samuel Shoemaker was an Episcopal priest in Pittsburgh, but he was one of the founding people, one of the founders of the Alcoholics Anonymous movement, and was a leader in that movement. And this is an example of the Cold War preaching in the 50s. This is from 1957.
Never before has any force planned such a world strategy as communism, nor come so near to carrying it out. The discovery of atomic energy may prove less important to the world than the discovery of such terrible psychological techniques as can reduce living, sentient, responsible people to human pulp. Attila and Genghis Khan knew almost as much about physical destruction and mass slaughter as the communists. But nothing has ever been seen in the world like the combination of skilled warfare, intellectual indoctrination of younger generations, and psychological pressures, such as those applied by the communists wherever they get a foothold. Almost a third of the world is under communist rule or influence. The world that believes in freedom and democracy is on the defensive. And I think myself that the world was never in greater danger. We watch this unfolding horror of a free world shrinking little by little, and of the communist monster biting off more and more portions of it to devour.
Obviously, Russia is not communist, but it's interesting. There's some similarities of what's going on. And we did not speed him up. That's the way he preached. He was very fast. All right, next is, okay, who has heard of C.S. Lewis? Obviously, Chronicles of Narnia, so forth. The Episcopal Media Center at the time recorded him in the 50s for a kind of a book on tape or whatever. And those programs became a quarter of programs one year, 1962, in which the voice of C.S. Lewis was heard for 12 episodes of the Protestant Hour, and it was repeated in 1980. But here's just a snippet of what became the book, The Four Loves.
In Greek, they have 4 words for love. Storge, S-T-O-R-G-E, means affection, the sort of love there ought to be between near relations. Philia, P-H-I-L-I-A, means friendship. Eros, E-R-O-S, is of course the love between the sexes. And agape, A-G-A-P-E, is love in the Christian sense, God's love for man and the Christian's love for the brethren. Love itself. Not a hunger that needs to be filled, but a fullness that gives away. Insofar as we become capable of that sort of love, agape is entering our lives.
Agape. I've never heard it pronounced that way, but that must be the way you pronounce it, right? But C.S. Lewis, come on. Very interesting. We still have those programs are still available as audiobook downloads. We get some royalties from those to this day. And this is just an example of, in the 50s, of course, was the heyday of this mainline church and this program. Dr. Robert Goodrich was one of the popular repeating Methodist preachers. He was from Dallas, Texas. This is 1953.
Each year sets new records for the psychiatrists. Alcoholism, gambling, suicides, broken homes, year by year the curve seems to go upward. But all of these are symptoms. The disease is a deep frustration in the heart and soul of persons. And even in its milder forms, this disease produces unhappiness and unhealthiness of soul. And certainly one of the chief causes is an unsatisfied longing in the heart and soul for life to have some durable satisfactions, some enduring significance. You see, God has set eternity in our hearts. That means more than a longing to survive the grave. It means that our hearts crave something that is permanent. We're not simply creatures of time, and we will be restless, unhappy, frustrated until we feel that life counts for something that makes a difference today and tomorrow. Just to eat and sleep and exist can never satisfy men who have eternity in their hearts. Life and labor must fulfill some purpose.
God has put eternity in our hearts, and unless we find that relationship with God, we're never satisfied. I think that'll preach today. Next is a Presbyterian preacher of this time period from Charlotte, Dr. John Redhead. He repeated several years as well.
A long time ago, you gave God his walking papers because you rebelled at the idea of someone who always stepped in and blocked the road to the things you wanted to do by giving you a set of rules that said don't. And then there came a whole flock of questions about God and trouble, and God always came off at the losing end, unable to square himself in the light of something called justice. If you're in the middle of that tunnel now, keep going. Take the word of one who has been there. Keep going, and you'll come out into the light. And then when life catches up with you, and you need something to lean on that's stronger than your own strength, shut your eyes and make friends with the Master. When you do, you'll discover that God is a long sea mile from being a joy killer and has become for you the life giver. And then you'll be ready to sing with the psalmist, "The Lord is the strength of my life."
Good stuff. This is the first African American to offer an entire 12-week series, the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, D.C., Bishop John T. Walker from 1986.
If you live in El Salvador, in Nicaragua, in Uganda, or the Middle East, you may well wonder whether peace or freedom will ever come. If you are unemployed in America, if you live in any of our major cities, you may well ask what there is to be joyful about. Yet in all these places, these same people are greeting one another, "A happy and blessed Christmas to you," they cry or sing, even as we do here. "Joy to the world, the Lord is come," many proclaim. From whence does such hope spring? What is it that keeps faith alive in South Africa or El Salvador, or any of the places where fear, hunger, and death stalk the earth?
And then the next one is another frequent Presbyterian preacher from Charlotte, Dr. Lewis Patrick.
Now you and I, like the man who wanted to use God to clinch his deal, and like the real-life people of Szechuan, you and I find the God of yesterday no longer a present help. That's a primal fact of our time, that for us, yesterday's God is dead. We can put our confidence in General Electric. We can expect better things for better living through DuPont's chemistry. We can be sure if it's Westinghouse. We can feel safe in the hands of Allstate. We can trust the man from Nationwide to be on our side. We can even look to Ford for better ideas. But the one thing we cannot do is to believe in God as men once did. It's more than a figure of speech to pronounce the death of yesterday's God.
Now that's pretty bold. He does go on to say we should believe in the God of today. So don't worry. He was kind of reeling us in there. This is Dr. Catherine Gonzalez. She was on the faculty of Columbia Theological Seminary and one of the first women to preach a full 12-week series as well, 1975.
This is the first week in the season of Lent, the 6 weeks of preparation before Good Friday and Easter. In our usual way of thinking, if we spend 6 weeks preparing for an event, there's very little chance we will be surprised by the celebration. But with Lent, the situation is really different. One of our greatest problems as Christians is that we can so easily take Good Friday and Easter for granted, as though they were thoroughly to be expected. And we do this for some very bad reasons.
Which she goes on to explain. Then the next is a voice you may have heard, Dr. Bill Self, who I referred to earlier. Bill was, I think he was the first Cooperative Baptist preacher on Day1, but he also, we worked with him to do a series of 30-second spots for the radio, and we sent those out to all kinds of radio stations, about 1,200 radio stations that played them. This is just an example of one of them.
Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Langston Hughes, the poet, has given us this good advice and suggests in it that our dreams help us define our lives. Without a life dream, a person has no direction. A mind stretched by a new idea never goes back to its original dimension. For growfaith.org, this is Bill Self. Have a good day.
Bill was a trustee, and he served as the chair of the board of our organization, the Alliance for Christian Media. He became a mentor to me, boy, yeah, we miss old Bill. We do have on our website the Bill Self Sermon Archives. There's about 200 or 300 of his sermons on there. You go to our website, on the side, you'll see the William L. Self Archives. Those are being put together by Tom Jack and Steve Wright, who were at Bill's church, Johns Creek. Susan Sparks, some of you know of Susan. We did an event with her here in the sanctuary several years ago. She is the senior pastor of Madison Avenue Baptist Church in New York City, but she is also a stand-up comedian. But she did a program earlier this year, and this is just the very beginning of the program.
We all experience tragedy and pain and loss, sometimes in horrible and unexplainable ways. And we ask why. And that's okay. God gave us a brain to question and to wonder. The trick is not to get stuck in that place of questioning.
That's the Reverend Susan Sparks. Okay, we don't need it. Why? I don't know if you heard that program, but she said, that question, why? Some people say it, why? But we know it's pronounced why. Doc Hollingsworth has been one of our stellar preachers over the past 10 years, and he preached earlier this year as well. This just give you a little taste in case you're jonesing to hear some Doc.
Jesus admonishes us to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Loving God with our minds suggests that God is not all that crazy about ignorance. Paul calls for the listeners to repent against ignorance. But as we will see, there's more than one kind of ignorance.
That's the Reverend Dr. Doc Hollingsworth, and today he brings you a we also had President Jimmy Carter on day one. By the way, we also had, Mr. Rogers. He was a Presbyterian minister. He did a program back in the 70s, and he played and sang some of the music that he ended up doing on the TV show that he did, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. But we also had President Carter, and he and Rosalind are in our prayers. We did a series called Faith and Global Hunger in 2010, and he was the capstone speaker. Here's just a sample.
I believe that Christ's command that we serve the poor is reason enough to struggle on behalf of those without enough to eat. But there's another powerful reason to extend the fight against hunger and extreme poverty. Very simply, we know great progress can be made, and this should inspire us to increase our efforts.
That's President Jimmy Carter, and today he brings you a powerful message. They gave us 20 minutes to record a half-hour program at the Carter Center, and we videotaped it as well. You can find that on our website. But he was incredible, and he knew about the program, and was very encouraging about it. Don Elliott Heald, I know some of you who've been around Atlanta for a long time may remember Don was the general manager of WSB TV and radio, and for 50 years, pretty much, he started as the host of the Episcopal part of the Protestant Hour, and then he became the host of the whole thing and served in that role until 2000. Here's just a taste of his voice.
You have been listening to the Protestant Hour, produced and distributed by the Protestant Radio and Television Center, Atlanta, Georgia. The Presbyterian Church USA the Episcopal Radio and TV Foundation, the United Methodist Church, and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America are pleased to have presented today's program. We hope the program's good news was spiritually stimulating for you. This is Don Elliott Heel suggesting you join us next week.
He was such a great guy. He was on our board when I started. For many years, some of you watched the Christmas Eve service from the cathedral across the street on Channel 2. And I think Don started that with the cathedral. He was a member of the cathedral, but he would record voiceovers for that service that we would drop in. I remember when he was growing ill toward the end of his life, he really wanted to do that last Christmas, and he was able to come in and do that. Great, great man. So I want to close these little snippets with Dr. Edmund Steinley, who by many accounts is the most popular and influential Protestant hour preacher. He was the Lutheran Church preacher every year, so he did a quarter of the year, 12 or 13 programs for 20 years. So it's 200 and some sermons that he preached over the Protestant hour. And this is a snippet from, so he had the last program that he did was in 1974, and this is just a little piece. It goes a little longer than the others. I hope you'll enjoy it.
And the darkness has been pretty thick at times. We've had our own private darknesses in our personal lives through these years, you and I, of course. But beyond our own private darknesses, the world has provided plenty of darkness in these 20 years. Back in 1955, when I started, the world was comparatively tranquil. But since that time, good God, the darknesses we've been through together. Chiefly, it's been the darkness of violence, which has broken out like a plague all over the world. The assassinations of John and Bobby Kennedy, of Martin Luther King. The long, dark tragedy of Vietnam, and to what purpose? 50,000 of our own men killed, to say nothing of the hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese, and that killing continues to go on. The ugly violence on college campuses spawning the massacre at Kent State. 2 wars in the Middle East. The agony in Northern Ireland. The skyjackings and acts of terrorism all over the place. The spread of the drug culture leading to muggings and violence on the streets of our cities. And on top of the violence, the sour smell of Watergate, the dark threat of the pollution of our environment, the energy crisis, the population explosion, and now the frightening spiral of inflation. As I say, the darkness has been pretty thick in these 2 decades, and I've been at pains in these sermons not to let you forget it. Because the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ is meaningless unless it is seen in the context of the actual world in which we live. One of the most insidious heresies of our times is to see the gospel as an escape from the darknesses in our lives and in the world around us. And if we are to preach the hope that is laid up in heaven for us, then we have to see that hope smack in the middle of everything which seems to deny it. For at the center of the gospel is the denial of hope. The cross, the crucifixion, the darkness of death. It is in the face of that denial of hope that the resurrection holds out its hope for us and for our world. So Paul, God has delivered us from the dominion of darkness. The darkness is there. The cross is there. Suffering, loneliness, and death are there. But we are delivered from the dominion, the power of the darkness to bury our hopes. And that, as I see it, is the task of preaching. Not to deny the darkness, but to shed light on our path as we walk through the darkness. And I hope that through the years, I've managed to shed a bit of God's light and hope and life on your path. For it is God's world after all. It is still in his hands. And so at the end of the Lord's Prayer we pray, "For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever."
He was able to preach through the radio in such a way that people thought he was speaking just to them personally. Quite a powerful preacher. I can't tell you how many preachers of a certain age who we recorded who remember listening to him as young people and what an impression he made on them and their own ministry that followed. So we are still shining the light. One of the things you may be interested with that Lilly grant is that the entire Protestant Hour archives will be available on our website. It'll be a few years because there's a lot of work that has to be done to catalog all that and create the data that's required. We do have, though, Day 1 programs from 2005 on. If you get bored, you can go to our website and just play around with some of the previous programs. Don't forget our website. We have an email address that you can reach Ethelware and me, and we invite you to come visit us on floor S1. Welcome any questions. We've got 2 more minutes, so. Doc.
I would also mention to those who teach Sunday school especially that I don't know for how long, but transcripts are also
Oh yeah, they go back to 1996.
And are a wonderful supplemental aid if you're teaching from a passage that's been preached on in Day 1, downloading those sermons as a supplement. The other potential for those resources is devotional reading.
Mm-hmm.
Most, don't record this part, most devotional books are pretty thin. But these sermons that are devotional in length,
Mm-hmm.
downloading those for devotional reading is a great resource.
Thank you. I agree.
So, Peter, we might, and Doc, and all of you, we have a group in North Carolina who studies the sermons.
Yeah.
So, they do a devotional together. And it's not, I don't think it's a Sunday morning class. I think it's a group that gets together. And so we mail them the copies of the transcript, and they study those.
And we'd be happy to do that. I did mean to mention Ethelware Carter is also the, what is your title with the Regional Council of Churches? She is Director of Programs, but it's basically her that does everything. And so she correlates all the activities of churches in the metro area and sends out a newsletter every week. So if you want to get on that list. Anything else you want to add about that? You need to do your own Wednesday night.
I'll come and do it Wednesday night. I've done one in the past, but I'll come back. But if you want to be on the newsletter list, I'd love to put you on it. I've got 6,000 or so people on it. I used to have 18,000, and I migrated to MailChimp, and they wouldn't let me bring my whole list. So I had to just start rebuilding. But anything that you need volunteers for, or that you would like the greater faith community to know about, and then you read it, and I'm always hearing from someone who became a volunteer somewhere because of something they read, or somebody who went to a program in Kennesaw. So.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me, or an estimate of how many listeners and what's the trend? Is this a high point, low point?
Oh, like everything involved with the church, there's probably some dwindling. We figure the radio stations reach about a third of the population of the country. How many of those are listening, we can't tell. Recently, I asked WSB if they might share what their ratings or listenership is. And they're very, very happy with us. They say Day 1 is routinely in the top 4 programs in its time slot on all the radio stations in the metro area on Sunday morning. And that our rating is the same. It's a 7 share, if that means anything to you. But that's what they get on their drive time programs. So they're very happy. And what happens when they mess up the program, or we do, they hear from people and they know people are listening. So I don't know, that gives you an idea. The podcast, anybody can listen to that at any time on any of those platforms. So I don't know how many that is, but it seems to be steady. Radio listenership is steady, so we're glad to be on WSB. It's an incredible station.
What percentage of your preachers are one-take preachers?
Yeah, that's a great question. Since you haven't preached yet, John, it's something to aspire to. I think Doc was 3 times, right? No, one take, what we call the one-take wonder is when a preacher comes, because we are fastidious and perfectionist in the production because the radio stations love that. We sound, one of the radio station managers in Texas says, your half hour is the best sounding program we have on our whole schedule. I don't know what the other ones were, but yeah, so sometimes a preacher will come in and have to, he'll flub or she'll mess up and she has to start over a sentence, or we have to have them do, retake this paragraph and they put it all together. In my experience of 22 years, I think about a dozen. It's very, very rare. We did have one recently that I was just so sad because it was a one take, but they read the wrong word in the script by mistake and had to go back and retake that paragraph. But we'll see how you do. Yes, ma'am.
You talk about at times past, one denomination would have a whole
Yeah.
but you don't do that.
No, that's an interesting question that I didn't explain. Yeah, when it started, it would be the Methodist hour for a quarter of the year, and then it would be the Presbyterian. But it was the Protestant hour, but they would brand it. So each year you had, a series by Lutheran or whatever. In the 90s, when the churches were still involved directly, they decided to mix it up so it would be more of an ecumenical message. So each preacher would do 3 or 4 instead of 12. They didn't all do 12, by the way. And then they would rotate between them. And when the denominations went away, we just couldn't manage to do that. So we just have people usually do one at a time. So it's really deconstructed since I've taken over.
What's y'all's method, though? Do you have a perfect distribution of?
No, we try to have a diversity of the denominations, geography, race, gender, all that kind of thing. And we have some, relatively conservative preachers, and we have some folks that, are kind of interesting. Usually they're United Church of Christ or something, but it's kind of the broad range of what we know of as the historic mainline Protestant church. So yeah, it's interesting because at the end of the year I always count up how many cooperative Baptists we have, and it usually kind of evens out. Okay, I don't want to. Yes, sir.
Was it the Protestant hour on the radio later than it is now?
What do you mean? At time? It was never an hour.
I think he means what hour? The hour that
Hour of the day it was on.
Start later.
It might have. I think it used to be on 7:30 here for a while, but each station has a different times. When it may have been. I think it's been on 7 since I've been here. When I started, the 4 producers from the denominations and I would meet once a quarter or so. In the very first meeting, I just started, and they said, we need to change the name of the program. And I said, what? Because I grew up in the Methodist church. My father and grandfather were Methodist pastors, and the Protestant hour was big. I mean, it was important, I thought. But they said, it sounds kind of dated. It's like people don't know what we're protesting. It's never been an hour long. Probably a half hour. So they said we need to come up with a new name, and we worked on a name forever. and faith journey, and and we were kind of pulling our hair out. It was a Friday night, Mexican with chips and salsa with some friends, and I was commiserating about the name. We couldn't come up with a new name, and this guy said, "Well, how about Day 1?" I said, "What? What?" He said, "Well, Day 1, the first day of the week is Sunday. First day of creation was light. You're bringing light. It sounds like a media show." I said, "Oh, okay." So we sold that to the producers and the board. So you can blame him if you don't like it. Yes, sir.
Have you had any really radical preachers?
Well, depends on how you define radical. Some people would say yes, because we get calls and emails from people who say, you had a woman preacher on, and you know what the Bible says. So I would say, we try to steer away from, real controversial things. We deal with issues that everybody's dealing with in our society, but the purpose is not to kind of raise hackles or get people upset, but to bring people together and hear the good news of the gospel. But I'm sure people would disagree with some of our preachers. Okay.
Yes, they would.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. It's been a joy, and we love you. We love you.